Lions with human heads, firebirds that rose from their own ashes, a one-horned beast roaming the desert. Ancient Egypt was filled with creatures that should not exist. Here's the thing, some of them did. Not as gods and not as symbols, but as real living animals that Egyptians watched, hunted, feared, and eventually transformed into legends. 7 of Egypt's most famous mythical creatures have a flesh and blood explanation, and in some cases, archaeologists have even discovered the bones to prove it. These are 7 mythical creatures of ancient Egypt that actually existed. Picture this. You are standing on the bank of the Nile in 3000 BCE. The river is not calm because it is filled with things that can kill you. There are hippos weighing 2 tons in capsizing boats without warning, crocodiles longer than a car waiting silently in the reeds, and cobras that rear to chest height while spitting venom. Enormous birds stalk the shallows like gray sentinels. Every creature the Egyptians worshipped, every god with an animal face, and every monster carved into tomb walls started here, on this river, surrounded by these animals. The Egyptians did not invent mythical beasts from nothing. They looked at the world around them and concluded that these creatures were too powerful, too strange, and too terrifying to be ordinary. Because of that, they believed the animals had to be divine. The real question is this: when exactly did the real animal end and the myth begin? Picture a creature standing upright like a person, but with the body of a hippopotamus, the tail of a crocodile, and the paws of a lion. This was Taweret, the goddess of childbirth, the protector of mothers, and one of the most worshipped figures in ancient Egypt. She sounds like pure invention, but she wasn't. Taweret was based on a real hippopotamus. By 3000 BCE, hippos were everywhere along the Nile, animals so massive, so unpredictable, and so explosively violent that Egyptians organized their entire understanding of them around gender. Male hippos were chaos incarnate, so Egyptians avoided them, hunted them, and sometimes ritually killed them as an act of defeating evil. Female hippos, however, were different. They were still fierce, but they were fiercely protective. A female hippo defending her young will charge anything because she is unstoppable. Here's where it gets strange. Egyptians didn't fear the female hippo because they revered her instead. They saw that same ferocity in mothers protecting children during childbirth, which was the most dangerous moment in an ancient Egyptian woman's life. Because of that, the hippo became the goddess. Amulets shaped like Taweret have been found across Egypt because pregnant women wore them for protection. Temple carvings show her blessing mothers, and archaeologists have pulled thousands of these figures from tombs and homes. The monster was real, but the myth was simply the explanation. A terrifying giant guarding mother seems impossible, but the next creature on this list is literally carved into the ground, and people still argue about what it really is. Picture a lion the size of a building, but with the face of a king. That is the Great Sphinx of Giza. It stretches 73 meters long and 20 meters tall because it was carved from a single ridge of living limestone around 2500 BCE. It is not a drawing on a wall, and it is not a story in a scroll. It is the largest monolithic statue on Earth, and it has been sitting in the desert for 4,500 years. The Sphinx is exactly what its name suggests, a creature with a lion's body and a human head. In Egyptian belief, the Sphinx was the guardian of sacred spaces because the lion symbolized royal power, a predator that dominated the landscape and answered to nothing. By placing the pharaoh's face on the body of that predator, the Egyptians were making a statement. This king is protected by the most dangerous force in nature. Here's the twist. Egyptians knew real lions because real lions still ranged across North Africa during the Old Kingdom period and were hunted by pharaohs as demonstrations of power. These were not symbols of lions or carvings of lions. They were actual animals. Ramesses II reportedly even kept a pet lion that accompanied him into battle. To the people who built the Sphinx, lions were not imaginary creatures. They were animals they encountered, respected, and feared. The myth was built on the animal, and the monument is proof that still stands. A stone lion guarding a pharaoh is one thing, but the next creature on this list was so beloved that killing one, even accidentally, could be punished by death. A woman with the head of a cat. This was Bastet, the goddess of home, warmth, and protection, and one of the most popular deities in ancient Egypt for more than 2,000 years. Behind her was an ordinary house cat. Not a big cat like a lion or a leopard, but the same size animal that sits on windowsills today. Egyptians domesticated cats around 4,000 years ago, and what began as a practical relationship, cats killing the rats that destroyed grain stores, eventually became something much deeper. Cats became sacred. Killing one, even by accident, was considered a crime that could end in execution. When a household cat died, the family shaved their eyebrows as a sign of mourning. Here's what archaeologists discovered at Saqqara. A cemetery, but not a human cemetery. It was a cat cemetery, containing hundreds of thousands of mummified cats, all brought to offerings to Bastet. The cats were carefully wrapped and placed in bronze boxes shaped like cats with gold earrings, because priests tended the site for centuries. These were not mythical creatures. They were pets that were beloved, mourned, and eventually deified, because the Egyptians saw something divine in them, the ability to move between the human world and the wild one, to be both tame and lethal. Cats were worshipped as gods, but the next creature on this list was worshipped as a god while it was still alive, fed by priests and mummified with full honors when it died. Picture a man standing in a river temple, chest deep in water, while holding out a piece of raw meat as a crocodile the size of a car glides toward him. This was a normal Tuesday for the priests of Sobek. Sobek was the crocodile-headed god of the Nile, the deity of water, strength, and the unpredictable power of the river. Unlike most Egyptian gods whose animal counterparts were symbolic, Sobek was worshipped through actual living crocodiles. In the city of Fayum, a place the Greeks literally called Crocodilopolis, priests kept sacred crocodiles in temple pools. The animals were adorned with gold jewelry, fed by hand, and venerated as physical manifestations of the god. When these crocodiles died, they were mummified. Not just one or two either. Archaeologists have discovered tombs containing hundreds of crocodile mummies at once, animals of every size, from hatchlings to full-grown males 4 meters long, all carefully preserved and buried with ritual honors. The crocodile cult operated for centuries across multiple temples and cities. Here's what makes this strange. These were animals that had killed people, because the Nile crocodile is one of the most dangerous predators on Earth, larger than almost anything in the water, faster than most people expect, and patient in a way that feels deliberate. Egyptians understood this because they watched people die at the river's edge. Because of that, the crocodile was not simply feared, it was respected in the same way you respect something that has total power over you. So the Egyptians turned it into a god, decorated it with jewels, and hoped it would protect them instead of eating them. The next creature didn't need to be large to terrify a pharaoh, because it only needed to appear on his crown. This is a pharaoh's crown. At the front, rising above the forehead, is a serpent that is rearing with its hood spread and poised to strike. This is the uraeus, the divine cobra, symbol of sovereignty, an emblem of the goddess Wadjet, protector of the pharaoh. It was worn as a crown ornament for more than 3,000 years. According to the mythology, the uraeus was a stylized Egyptian cobra worn on the forehead of every pharaoh, because it was modeled directly from the living animal that populated the Nile Valley. The fire was not actually fire, it was venom. The serpent was not mythological either. It was the same snake farmers accidentally stepped on in the wheat fields. The Egyptians took the most terrifying snake they knew, placed it on the head of their most powerful ruler, and declared, "This is what protects the king." It was not a monster from their imagination, but an animal from their own backyard. A fire-breathing cobra on a crown is already a powerful symbol, but the next creature is even stranger, because Egyptians were painting the world's most famous mythical animal without even knowing it was an animal at all. Imagine an animal standing in the desert with long legs, a white coat that almost glows against the sand, and 2 long scimitar-shaped horns curving backward like blades. Now, picture that animal from the side. From a profile view, the 2 horns overlap so perfectly that they appear as one, a single curved horn rising from the forehead of a desert antelope. This is a scimitar-horned oryx. Egyptians hunted it, painted it, and even named entire regions after it. The oryx Nome, a province of Upper Egypt, took its symbol from this animal. The oryx appears in hieroglyphs, tomb paintings, and carved reliefs across the Nile Valley because Egyptians had direct contact with the living creature. Again and again, they depicted what looked like a single-horned animal. Here's what scholars now believe. When ancient travelers from the Mediterranean encountered Egyptian art showing this one-horned creature, or saw the oryx themselves in the wild from a side angle, they carried the image back home. Over centuries, the story of the one-horned desert animal evolved. It became wider, more magical, and eventually transformed into the unicorn. Egypt's unicorn was a real animal. It simply had two horns, but you only needed to stand in the right place to see one. The oryx is now considered extinct in the wild, but the next creature was arguably even stranger because Egypt built an entire mythology of rebirth around it. The most surprising part is that its real-world ancestor was hiding in plain sight for centuries, and scientists only discovered the bones recently. Now, last but not the least, imagine a bird the size of a human being standing in the shallows of the Nile Delta. It has gray feathers, a long curved neck, and a crown of two dark plumes rising from the back of its head. It stands perfectly still, watching, and then suddenly, it is gone. The ancient Egyptians called it the Bennu. In Egyptian mythology, the Bennu was a divine bird of fire and rebirth, the Egyptian phoenix. It was said to appear at the dawn of creation, landing on the sacred Benben stone at Heliopolis and crying out the very first sound in the universe. According to the myth, when a Bennu died, it burst into flame and was reborn from its own ashes. Because of this, it became the symbol of the sun's daily cycle, resurrection, and eternal life. For a long time, scholars assumed the Bennu was purely symbolic and that it was an invented creature created to carry Egypt's theology of rebirth. Here's where it gets strange. In 2010, archaeologists working in the Arabian Peninsula discovered giant heron bones. Radiocarbon dating placed them between 2700 and 1800 BCE, which was the exact period when Bennu mythology was at its height. Scientists named the species Ardea bennuides, the Bennu heron, because the extinct bird matched the myth so closely. This species of heron once stood between 2 and 3 meters tall, making it taller than most humans, and it possessed the crest of long plumes on its head that almost perfectly matched ancient Egyptian depictions of the Bennu. Scientists named the bird after the myth because the myth matched the animal. The gray-crested, impossibly tall heron that once waded through Nile shallows was not a symbol invented to explain the sunrise. It was a real creature the Egyptians actually saw. And when it eventually disappeared from the landscape, as species do when environments change, all that remained was the story. The firebird, the phoenix, the bird that dies and lives again. The Egyptians did not watch it rise from flames. They simply stopped seeing it one day and they built a god out of the absence. 7 creatures, 7 myths, 7 real animals hidden beneath the legends. There was the hippopotamus that became a mother goddess, the lion carved into an entire cliff as a royal guardian, and the house cat that became sacred because an entire civilization could not imagine losing it. There was also the crocodile adorned with gold and buried with priestly honors, the cobra that appeared on every pharaoh's forehead for 3,000 years, and the desert antelope that became the unicorn simply because people stood in the wrong place. And finally, there was a giant heron whose bones scientists discovered in the sand, already carrying the name of a god. Egypt's myths were not fantasies. They were observations because the Nile was filled with animals so extreme, so powerful, and so strange that the only framework large enough to contain them was religion. The bones exist, the amulets exist, the mummies exist, and the carvings still match the creatures. Behind every god was a real animal that inspired the legend, and there are still thousands of hieroglyphs we have not fully translated yet. So what else is still buried beneath the sand?